We are off and rolling for the 2023, technically 2024-23-24 football season. Welcome to Bound to Talk Football Edition. Blake Walker with you here, Paul Arridge on the other side. This is a new podcast that we're trying out here on the Bound social media pages. It'll also go out on YouTube. Paul, we've been cracking numbers. We've been doing a lot. It's time to talk some preseason football.
Yep, definitely is. We've been breaking down all the teams, looking at who's returning, ready to talk some football finally.
We're going to try to keep this as a weekly podcast, probably 2, possibly 3 times a week. This is our preseason episode. We're going to do another episode here on either Wednesday or Thursday that'll come out, maybe on Friday. That will be your weekly preview of what we see, what games are ahead. And then the plan is we'll record on Mondays and or Sundays. They'll be out on Mondays of your recap of your Friday night football. Wednesday, we'll do maybe just statistical stuff, and then obviously our weekly previews. So we'll just kind of keep it moving along. We've added a couple new people to our Bound staff. They might jump on here once in a while. So there's a lot to look forward to here for the upcoming football season. We appreciate everyone for following along. We just posted our rankings a couple days ago. Paul and I made sure not to look at the comments on that post. So we're keeping it moving. But we're going to go through our preview. Paul and I went through and looked at a couple teams that we wrote down, got a couple stats for, and we're going to talk about as possible previews for who's going to be good this season. So, Paul, we're going to start in Class 5A, and I think we'll just address the elephant in the room. And I guess I'll ask you just straight up, can Southeast Polk make it a three-peat in 2023?
I think they definitely can. They're, I think, the clear favorite for everyone so far. I mean, obviously returning Iowa State commit Connor Moberly, and they added C.J. Phillip, Dowling's starting running back last year. That was sensational for them. And they've got C.J. Robbins, their number one, or Carson Robbins, their number one wide receiver returning. So they return a lot on offense along with that stellar offensive line from last year. They get 4 out of 5 back. So they're looking set basically to at least pick up right where they left off on offense. Defense, who is a sensational defensive lineman for them, but they've got their top 3 tacklers returning as well. So they're looking loaded just as ever. They're on the cusp of a three-peat as long as they maintain what they did last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Cooper Martinson, another big one on that defensive side, 43 tackles last year, 1 sack. Moberly's numbers, I mean, everybody was like, how does he fill in? 14 touchdowns, 4 picks. Like you said, Carson Robbins, 6 touchdowns in the receiving game. Southeast Polk, defending state champions, 2-time defending state champions, look like they might be the ones to beat once again. I think their closest competitor that I have down, Dowling Catholic, state semifinalist, fell short to Valley in a thrilling, one of the best state semifinals we've ever seen. I assume Dante Cataldo will be running the quarterback position this year for Dowling Catholic. Played a little bit last year, 286 yards, 2 touchdowns. But Paul, Rashad Davis might be the answer for Dowling Catholic this upcoming season.
And they've got Kyle Rakers on that offensive line as well. And they always seem to have just a solid offensive line. Defense, they lose a lot from last year. That'll be the big question mark for them. But it's Dowling Catholic. They've turned in a good team every year. And Rashad Davis is looking like he could be a very, very good running back this year. And I also would like to point out that Hank Brown Jr., I really like him as wide receiver for them. He's taken some steps, been to a lot of camps. And I've heard good things about him as well. So I think there's a good chance their offense will be fine. The biggest question mark will be their defense. Looking at returning tacklers, they got Matthew Hanton, if I'm saying that right, his name. Yeah. Yep. And then other than that, that's it. Dylan Manning at the defensive line. I know he's a solid, good defensive lineman. I don't know if they'll move him to linebacker or not, but he's a solid piece for them as well. So we'll have to see. For Dowling, it's kind of question mark for defense. But other than that, expect them to reload just as every year.
Yeah, it's a fun schedule as well. I'm going to go my third team that I wrote down as kind of a sneaky team. I got to give a shout out because their defense is unbelievable. I'm going to go Cedar Falls as my third team to watch. They went 8-3 last year. It's kind of unbelievable what they returned. Tate Hermanson, he comes back at the quarterback position. Didn't toss the ball a lot last year, but they kind of found their footing with him. Drake Gelhaus returns at the running back position, 1,469 yards last season. 14 touchdowns. And then how about this defense? You got Caleb Whelan, Colin Coonrat, Drew Gertis, Ian Bowenkamp, and Drew Campbell all had over 25 tackles last year. And guess what? They're all coming back. I mean, that Cedar Falls defense is going to be a problem this season.
Yeah, they're right up there in the top teams in the East for sure. I go Kennedy is the other top team in the East out there. I mean, they return an insane amount, and they've got Jake Peters on that offensive line. And, I mean, last year their rushing attack was pretty, right there in the top of the state. So, yeah, Cedar Falls is definitely dangerous, especially with that defense. I mean, Drew Campbell we know will be really good, and then they've got tons of other guys that make plays. So, I like Cedar Falls, especially you're right about that defense. And then I want to point out, I think Johnston, at least in the Central Iowa, will be really good. Return a lot of solid defensive players. They've got Josh Kerber coming back, Taylor Proctor. He's a really good DB for them. And then they also, of course, everyone knows they got Will Nuss coming back and Jacob Simpson, who are two of some of the best duo in the state. So
I got to ask you, what kind of season do we see out of Will Nuss? Because we saw him take that step, and I think a lot of people figured out who he was last year. What do you see from him?
I mean, I see him taking a step up again. I mean, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions last year. He's just arm power, throw power is right up there, top QBs in the state. Wide receiver will be interesting. I mean, he's got Jacob Simpson, but I think Adrian Broadus will be important for them in the wide receiving game. He didn't really he was supposed to play quarterback last year and switched to wide receiver. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that transition goes. And then they also did get Dalen Huston, I believe is how you pronounce it, from Marshalltown, who's gotten looks at D1 colleges. So that's a big transfer piece for them as well.
I called Roosevelt Marshalltown's game last year. Marshalltown won that game. Dalen was unbelievable athlete. That's a big get for them. You touched on Cedar Rapids, Kennedy. Do we need to touch on Valley as well? Kind of two teams that we haven't talked about, but are pretty high up that could be ones to watch.
Yeah, Valley, I mean, they the story with them is they always reload. They lose Provenza, which he stats-wise, you look at him and you aren't that thrilled, but playoff time, he was right up there playing as one of the best quarterbacks in the state. Offense, I mean, it's the big step. The big question mark will be, is Zay Robinson going to be a top player we've seen, or is he just going to carry them to a solid record, and then we'll see what happens in the playoffs. Darius Mason also returns for them at running back. So they've got some pieces on offense, and I've heard that Jaden McGregory will be playing quarterback for them. So we'll see how that goes. I believe he played DB and some quarterback for Des Moines North last year. Yeah. Apparently, I mean, he's a 4-star talent. So if you're looking at 247 stars, Valley's definitely a team you're keeping an eye on all year. But I'd say that we're worried about their defense and how that translates, because they lose a lot. But I said that last year for them, and they're playing the championship. So
5-4 in the regular season. I think everybody wrote them off. Just a couple quick things as we wrap up 5A. Our top 10 that we put out, we had Centennial at 7, Waukee Northwest at 8, Waukee at 9, Iowa City West at 10. That Waukee team, Paul, I think could be one of the more fun teams to watch in Class 5A. Beckett Baker returns at quarterback. I think was only a freshman last year, if I'm not mistaken, or pretty young. So I think Waukee could be a sneaky team. And you pointed out they're now a 5A team. Iowa City Liberty returns a good chunk of that offense with a really good quarterback at the helm.
Yeah, Graham Beckham lit up Iowa City High last year, and I believe he lit up Limar as well. And those are two 5A teams that usually have a solid defense. So he's right up there in the top quarterbacks in 5A for sure. I think it'd go Nuss. You got Moberly, and then you got him right in that combo. So you got guys like Trenton Smith and other guys in there too. But I think he's right there. It'll be interesting to see how that 5A adjustment goes. But last year they were undefeated against 5A. So, well, I mean, especially out in Eastern Iowa, I know they're in Ankeny's group, but Ankeny also lost a big chunk. So,
that's
they have a chance to win that group for sure.
I think Ankeny, just quickly touching on Ankeny kind of reminds me how we looked at Valley last year. Lost a lot. I think the Hawks could make a little bit of a push. New head coach, you got to kind of get things figured out. But it's Ankeny. I'm not counting them out. And we get Ankeny Centennial week 1. Like, that just never happens. So we get to see what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, they've got Connor Kaiser is going to UNI. Devin Akers is a D1 tight end or a wide receiver / tight end option. And then Daniel Larme, I believe how you pronounce his name. Sorry if I mispronounced that, but I've heard a lot about him, and he's freakishly strong, and he's a sophomore. Freshman last year was on the varsity roster. So I've heard a lot about him as well. So they could make a run. They've got, in a central Iowa standards, they've got a weak class, like a weak district, but they do have to play the Dogs first 4 weeks. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, non-conference slate's going to be non-district slate's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to jump down to Class 4A, and once again, it's the defending state champions who look like they could run the class. It's Coach Schulte's Xavier Saints. They bring back one of the best quarterbacks in the state in that class. This class is stacked, 4A and 3A down to. Xavier 13-0. Ronan Thompson returns 1,598 yards last year, 21 touchdowns. They both returned their running backs, Colton Beasler and Grant Helmley, both rushed for over 300-plus yards. And then Bryce Kramer is back on defense. I will say, Paul, their wide receiver depth is a little tricky. That's going to be a tough spot to get, but it's Xavier. We just expect them to come back anyway.
Yep. Yeah. Physically, their run game is always going to be dominant. And then when you've got a guy at the helm like Ronan Thomas, you're looking at state championship or bust for sure for them. And Ronan Thomas can rush the ball as well. He had 9 touchdowns last year rushing the ball. So we'll see how that receiving core looks, but I'm confident in them being fine, especially with how good they always are. Those schools just seem to reload every year.
I'm going to go North Scott next, 9-3. The Lancers not defending state champions, won the state championship in 3A a couple of years ago over Harlan. Return a really talented quarterback, Kyler Gurdy, 1,645 yards, 15 touchdowns in the air, and then 1,217 yards, 19 touchdowns on the ground. He loses a good chunk of his wide receiver core, but that defense all return. Nolan Engelbrecht, Owen Jordahl, Colin Albrecht, and Luke Belkin all return on defense. This North Scott team is going to be pretty tricky, but I think they're going to be using the run game quite a bit this year. Yeah,
Girardi at quarterback is rushing at 8.1 yards a carry last year. That's ridiculous when you count in sacks and all that. So, he's right up there and probably top dual threats in the state. So, North Scott will be interesting. Again, you said it yourself, the receiving core, we're looking at basically no returning starters. But, when the dude's rushing the ball like that, he'll find people open. Doesn't matter who's catching the ball. So,
yeah, absolutely. Paul, I think you and I both agreed Harlan was the greatest show on turf for the last couple seasons. This might be the new greatest show on turf. This is the ADM Tigers, 10-2 record, state semifinalists last year. Aiden Flora, Brevendal, probably the best 1-2 punch we've seen in quite a while, at least since Tegan Kasperbauer and a couple of his wide receivers at Harlan.
Yeah, if you're looking for you want to see the most exciting football game, ADM's one of the teams you're going to want to be looking at. Aiden Flora is right up there. Ridiculous stats. If you're looking at them, I just talked about Girardi averaging 9 or 8.1 yards a carry. He averaged 11.2 last year with 17 touchdowns at quarterback. So, you're looking at a guy that's probably going to be in the 2,000 range for at least one of those stats this year. And then obviously Brevendal, elite athlete, 27 touchdowns last year, probably right up there in the best of the state or most touchdowns in the state with every class included. So ADM, if you want touchdowns and explosive plays, you're going to want to tune into all their games this year.
And not to mention, their offense is great, but Dane Beals and Carver Sutton also return on defense. Both of them had 48 tackles and combined had 10 sacks on the year. So it's not just offense. ADM returns defense, which gave up a bit of points last year. Almost, 60 to 40 something against North Polk to get to the Dome. And then Harlan, obviously a high scoring game. They do lose their head coach. They will have a new head coach this year at ADM, but that team is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, ADM's probably the most fun team in the class, or most fun team to just look at in general if you're looking for question marks, but also just they're going to be good. So
yeah. Another sneaky team, another state champion in the last 6-7 years. I can't remember. It's been a couple years, but they beat Solon in the state championship game in 3A a couple of years ago. Western Dubuque, the Bobcats, 6-4. They are very intriguing. Brett Harris, 1,257 yards, 10 touchdowns. He comes back. And then Grant Glosser had 19 touchdowns last year. He comes back. Derek Horner, Brock Carpenter return on defense. This Western Dubuque team, they play a tough schedule, but could be back to their winning ways. This looks like a pretty good team.
Yeah, Brock Carpenter, I've heard a lot of good things about him. And then Brett Harris led freshman in passing yards, I believe, last year with 1,257. So, I mean, we're looking at a dangerous team in 4A, I believe. Yeah, 4A. And, they got some names all around defensively. It's looking like they've got a lot of returning leading tacklers. So they're going to be seamlessly transitioning in defense, and they've got their starting QB back at the helm. So that's exactly what you want heading into the season.
I do have one more quick thing. North Polk returns their quarterback, Reggie Postel. That North Polk team, kind of a sneaky bit. It's tough being in 4A, but the Comets have slowly but surely been getting better the last couple of years. I keep an eye on the Comets. They got a pretty good one. You got any others for Class 4A?
Bondurant for obviously with Titus Cram. That will be an explosive team to watch. I'm sure his stats will be ridiculous this year. Other than that, I think we hit all the teams we want to talk about for it.
That's the Raccoon River Conference. Currently 3 teams of the some that we talked about, and then the couple teams out on the eastern side of Iowa. So should be fun. We're going to move on to my favorite class, truly. This is Class 3A. The state runner-ups, Mount Vernon, the Mustangs, bring back probably the best quarterback in the class in Joey Romberg. 2,543 yards, 25 touchdowns. Jackson Hurd is back in the receiving game or in the rushing game. Evan Brace is back receiving. And then Jackson Japers, 110 total tackles. He's back on defense. This Mount Vernon team kind of came out of nowhere last year, like beat Solon, and then everyone's like, oh, wow, Mount Vernon. And then runner up to Harlan in a close game of the state title game.
Yep, exactly. I mean, Jackson Jaspers, 110 tackles last year. After that, it does get a little thin on returners, but they'll reload. I'm sure it looks like they had some dudes contribute towards the end of the season with underclassmen. And then obviously Joey Romberg leading them at the helm. It looks like, I mean, that's all you want in high school. You want a starting quarterback coming back that excelled their junior year. So they're looking good. I think they're poised to win a state championship as long as things go smoothly for them. But this class, as you said, is very competitive. I mean, we're about to talk about them, but Williamsburg.
I got to get your opinion. I feel like we're seeing more younger quarterbacks now. Like, I just feel like we're seeing more sophomores, some freshmen and juniors. I honestly think maybe you feel the same way. It makes it more fun because then you're like, okay, now we get to see how they grow. Tegan Kasperbauer was pretty much almost a 3.5, 4-year starter at Harlan. And you're like, oh my gosh, if he's putting up these numbers this young, like imagine what he's doing later on down the line.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it in 5A a lot more. I mean, to name a few, I mean, Jack Wallace started as a freshman. Beckett Baker started as a freshman. Freshmen are getting their spotlight as long as they got the talent, and it's fun to see them grow because, I mean, when you're a freshman and you're already getting reps when other dudes are playing freshman ball, I mean, that's crazy.
You want to talk about the next team? 12-1 record, state runner-up in Class 2A. The Williamsburg Raiders look like they are going to be a problem in Class 3A. They jump up a class, but this team's going to be really fun.
Yeah, Williamsburg, I mean, we got Derek Weiskoff, who got invited to the All-American game recently. A lot of people consider him one of the best players in the state, 4-star Hawkeye commit. So a lot of people will be keeping his eyes on him if you're a Hawkeye fan. I mean, defensively, he's going to be a crazy dominant force out there. And then they've also got Race Heitman, a sophomore with 88 tackles last year returning.
Also returns in the wide receiver game. Him and Clayton Steckley are also return on the wide receiver court. I don't know who they're going to run with at quarterback. I thought maybe Grant Hawker, but I'm not entirely sure. And then Simeon Armbrecht also returns on defense, 3.5 sacks. It's a good team. I mean, Williamsburg is very good. I saw a video from their scrimmage the other day. Derek was already having some great plays. So this team's going to be a lot of fun. In 3A now.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Should be a good one.
I mean, this is a team that beat Van Meter last year, and that was when Van Meter hadn't lost a game in 41 games or something. It was some crazy stat. So, yeah, they're definitely right up there. I said Mount Vernon's kind of poised to have a chance at winning it all, but, I mean, Williamsburg's also right there.
Yeah. I wrote down a ton of teams for Class 3A because this class is just so stacked, in my opinion. I'm going to quickly run through the team and then why I brought them down. Harlan will take a step back, and I don't shoot me for saying it, but I truly think Harlan will take a step back. That step back could still be the state tournament. Like, they could still make it to the Dome. They do return Cade Sears, but you have to replace a really good wide receiver core, and you really have to replace a really good quarterback. So I think Harlan might take a step back, but it's still going to be fun. I'll really judge Harlan on week 1 based off their performance against Lewis Central. That's how we'll kind of gauge how they are. Humboldt returns Lance Kuhn at running back. He is an absolute dog on the offensive side. They lose their quarterback, but Lance Kuhn is just going to get a lot of carries. I expect him to be well over 2,000 yards this year. Solon returns Brett White in the running back game, and they bring back a really good defense. They didn't really throw the ball last year with Timmons, so I expect Solon to be back to a pretty good way. They have to play Williamsburg in their district. Nevada, kind of the snaky surprise team the last couple of years. Cason Stevenson returns on defense or on offense in the running back game, and then they bring back a lot on defense. They have to replace quarterback. They have to replace tight end. That's going to be interesting to see how their offense regains. Atlantic. I don't think anybody's talking about Atlantic, but Atlantic brings back most of their starting offense, which is going to be fun to watch. And then Independence, another sneaky team. Trayton Weber and Brady Kurt come back. And you also had another team, Paul, that I missed, but I shouldn't have missed for how good they bring back.
Yeah, Webster City with Jackson Cherry will be definitely a team to watch. I mean, they got Jackson Cherry, and he dropped, I think, some ridiculous stats last year. And then I actually had another team I just saw, Algona with Alex Mansky.
Yeah, yep.
That team will be good. They also got Jack Limbaugh, I believe. So
I will say Algona will have a lot of eyes on them because of Alex. We've heard a lot about Alex this year, has offers. I think he got offered from Iowa as well. Just plenty of colleges around.
Yeah. I mean, he's I've heard a lot about – I mean, I've heard he's legit. His sophomore year stats weren't nothing to be like crazy about, but I mean, he's got offers this summer. He's gotten offers to Kansas State, Minnesota, Nebraska, Pittsburgh. I mean, that's
wild.
That's legit Power 5 schools that are giving him offers. And you can keep the list just keeps going. Wisconsin as well. So
the film is good for him. I'm excited to see the team around him. I think that when you have a player like that, I feel like the team kind of feels better around you. Algona is a really good one. We're gonna move down to Class 2A, and once again, the defending state champions, the Central Lions. They lose Zach Lutmer. That's a big loss. But I tell you what, they return a lot. Rushing-wise, Graham Eben, 1,330-yard rusher, 19 touchdowns. But Reese Vanderzee also comes back with Isaiah Johnson. The offense is there. I think they just got to find a quarterback.
Yep, exactly. I mean, Reese Vanderzee was right up there as the best wide receivers in the state. It all come down for quarterback for them. Graham Eben obviously was terrific last year as well. So, I mean, this team, I believe, can reload just fine and have a crack at the championship. But as we're about to talk about, they've got competition without a doubt. And
they do.
2A is kind of a dogfight. So
2A is a dogfight. I also got to give a shout out to Drew Danakis, 7.5 sacks. He returns for Central Lion. Another sneaky one that got kind of upset by OABCIG last year before they could even get a chance in the playoffs. Spirit Lake is going to be a lot of fun. Caden Lunt and Bodie Higgins, both sophomores last year, both quarterback, running back. Caden, the quarterback, 12 touchdowns, 1,192 yards. He is back, obviously, for his junior season. Bodie Higgins, 966 yards, 16 touchdowns. They bring back Owen Lalumendre, I think, 7 sacks. The wide receiver core might be an issue, but statistically, Spirit Lake brings back the best offensive numbers, it feels like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Spirit Lake, you're big on them, and that OABCIG loss, I'm sure, fuels them for a big-time comeback. So, yeah, I like Spirit Lake.
Yeah, go Spirit Lake. Van Meter, state champs. I put them third on my list because they lost a lot. This is the most I think Van Meter's lost in a while. But I said Van Meter because it's Van Meter. They bring back 3 of their 4 linebackers and Porter Doggett. John Brown and Teddy Seek, and then Ben Gordon is back at running back. 28 touchdowns, 1,734 yards. Lindsay, their kicker, she's back, and she's been automatic, it feels like, for them, and she just keeps getting better and better. She's truly one of the better kickers in the state. Paul, Van Meter's Van Meter. I don't think we can count him out.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Gordon, I expect will be in that 2K range for yards this year, and I'm sure 30-plus touchdowns, especially with losing their quarterback. I'm sure he's got a big role this year. But, yep, you're exactly right. It's Van Meter. Schools like this, they don't tend to regress. They just tend to reload. So, I mean, they lost Michael Banks last year, who was ridiculous, 20-plus TFLs, but Porter Doggett looks good as well, and they've got a couple of returning tacklers. It looks like quite a bit, actually, that will make an impact this year. So, I mean, they move up, and that'll be big for them. But, I mean, they're always competitive. They're never going to have a bad season. I expect them in the Dome for sure.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think, but expect Van Meter to just keep moving up when it comes to classes. That place just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Yeah. They'll be 3A here in 5 years. Yeah, it feels crazy to say, but last team I wrote down, Greene County, 8-2 record. I looked at their stats and was actually pretty surprised. Gabe Eversole, 1,253 yards, 15 touchdowns last year. Jack Hansen's back in the running game. And they also return a lot on defense. I think a lot of people look over Greene County. Their schedule isn't that bad. I think Greene County will be pretty good. Paul, I know you've been high on them. Monticello and Preston Rees, that's a pretty good team.
Yeah, Monticello, Preston Rees, I mean, he's right up there, one of the best players in this class. So, I mean, you can't count them out for sure. I like Preston Rees, I mean, 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions last year, and 17 rushing touchdowns along with that. So he's easily one of the most prolific players in the state. Just depends on how much help he gets.
You had Kemper, I believe, as the other team possibly.
Yeah, I mean, DJ Vonamy, a lot of people consider him one of the best two-way players in the state, I guess. Yeah, he plays quarterback and safety. He'll have a great year as well. It'll be interesting to see them. We have them in that 7 range. So they're kind of for dome-wise, we're a little bit sleeping on them. But I mean, they've got DJ. Depends on how big of a step he takes. But they'll be right there.
Absolutely. We're going to move down to Class 1A, where we see the team that returned the most out of anybody in the entire state, and it just so happens that they were state champions. Grundy Center, the Spartans, 13-0. They returned Colin Gordon, 2,071 yards passing, 25 touchdowns, 542 yards on the ground, 11 touchdowns. Justin Knack, 890 yards, 19 touchdowns. Tate Jervosky, 580 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns. Tanner Lobby, 233 yards, 3 touchdowns. Oh, by the way, they returned Riker Thorin and Trent Kakris on the defensive end, who both had 5 sacks each. Paul, I don't want to completely write anybody off, and I'm not going to, but Grundy Center might have the best chance of anybody to repeat.
Yeah, we're looking at the heavy favorites as from the public eye, I'm sure. And every preseason poll will have these guys at number 1. But, I mean, on defense, they're returning their top 4 tacklers. And then offense, they're returning Colin Gordon, who on the state championship was playing like he was possessed. So
I think Colin Gordon could be the best player in the state of Iowa. Like, I'm not saying writing him on as the Gatorade Player of the Year, but Colin Gordon might just be the guy in the state of Iowa for how good he has been, both running and passing.
Yeah, I mean, stat-wise, he'll definitely be up there. I mean, we got in the state championship last year, he had, I believe, 3 touchdowns and 200 total yards, and that was 110 rushing yards as a quarterback. So he was lighting it up. And I remember it was the Woodbury Central game. I mean, he went absolutely nuts. He had 249 passing yards with 5 touchdowns. So, I mean, this guy's been there. It's kind of hard to –
They've all been there.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say they're not going to be there again. So
yeah. A couple of the competitors that we have written down, Underwood, 11-1 record. Maddox Nelson returns at running back, 15 touchdowns. Graham Jensen, 12 touchdowns. On defense, Mason Boothby, Jack Van Fossen, and Easton Robertson they're all back at wide receiver. So the offense is there. You just have to replace Alex Ravlin.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, they got Graham Jensen returning, who's was their leading tackler, and also Jack Van Vossen. So
Yeah.
They've got guys returning on defense, it looks like. So, hey, they're there. We've been hyping up Grundy Center, but Underwood will be there. I'm sure they think they're going to make a run at it for sure. So
They get a fun week 1 test against Van Meter.
Yep.
Two teams that need a quarterback.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, two teams that need a quarterback. We'll figure out what quarterback they have in week 1. That's going to be a blast. Spoiler alert, might be one of our games of the week. Our next team, MFL Marmac, 9-2 record last year. This team kind of out of nowhere, but it's amazing what they return. Zach Driscoll, 13 touchdowns. Wyatt Powell at running back, 1,154 yards, 15 touchdowns. They return all but one wide receiver that was on their 2022 roster. Tristan Cohen, 4.5 sacks. The Bulldogs could be sneaky for what they return.
Yeah. I mean, Zach Driscoll, we've seen him as being one of the best young guys in the state.
Yeah.
Played basketball as well and was amazing there as well. So, I mean, in football, he was also a stud. There'll definitely be a fun team to watch this year. As you said, they came out of nowhere, but I mean, they've got guys returning as well, quite a bit.
Yeah, it's actually
really
4,
5, 6, 7 starters almost on their defense. I mean, so
it's kind of amazing what MFL Marmac returns. They will be one to watch. Sigourney Kyoto is the other team I had down. This team's going to run for like close to 5,000 yards this year. I don't see why they need to pass the ball. Isaac Bruns is back at running back, who had 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. Cole Kindred and Reed Molyneux, 200-plus yards rushers. They come back, and then Evan Vitito and Jake Moore return on defense. It's a pretty easier district for Sigourney Kyoto, but this team has shown in the past they have a lot of power. But like I said, I don't think they're going to pass the ball.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of teams like that when we get to these lower classes. Running the ball just works. Yeah. And, there's no reason to hop off it if it's working. So, 5K range, you set the line, right? Over, under 5K?
Yeah, that's the thing. Couple other teams, just looking at our rankings that we threw out there. Those were our top 4 teams we wrote down. Iowa City, Regina, can't count out them. They're always going to be good. South Hamilton could be a really sneaky team this year. Columbus Catholic, AHSTW, Sumner Fredericksburg, and Trainer, all going to be interesting to watch this upcoming season. We're going to jump down to Class A, where the state runner-ups, because now we don't have our Class A champion with us anymore as Grundy Center moves up class. Wes Hancock brings back everybody. Same thing. Mitchell Smith, 1,000 yards on the ground, 11 touchdowns, 780 yards in the air, 11 touchdowns. Kale Zool, 1,196 yards, 15 touchdowns. They will lose their top wide receiver, but that's it. And then Brady Bixel, Nolan Baskey, and David Smith all return on defense. This Wes Hancock team was really good. Not good enough to beat Grundy Center. Now Grundy Center's gone, and now they get to see what they can return. Yeah,
I'd be right. I'm right with you here. I mean, Mitchell Smith was a stud last year, and they just kind of ran into a buzzsaw with Grundy Center. So, they're the favorite probably, I'd say, to win it in Class A. There is some competition, as we've seen. I mean, the other team that ran into the buzzsaw that was Grundy Center is right there with them.
Woodbury Central, 10-1 state semifinalist. They return, would you say top quarterback in the state? Drew Kluender, 37 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 3,419 yards. They don't return much in the running back category, but Eric McGill and Zach Butler both are back at wide receiver. Eric McGill was unbelievable last year, over 1,000 yards receiving, 16 touchdowns. They do have to replace a couple stars on defense, but offensively, Woodbury Central should be right there.
Yeah, I mean, passing, if you're going off pure passing yards, you'd say he's the best quarterback in the state. But, I mean, ridiculous numbers last year, 37 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Pretty nuts. But, I mean, defensively, we'll see how that goes. I know that's what hurt them last year, was letting 49 get dropped on them. And when you run into a team, I believe Wes Hancock, they're going to have a good defense. So we'll have to see how that goes. But, I'd expect Drew Klunder to be right in the same totals that he was last year.
Yeah, absolutely. East Buchanan, the other team I have down, 9-2 record. Tristan Russell comes back at quarterback. He didn't throw the ball a lot, but 7 touchdowns and no picks for 335 yards. I say that's pretty good. The running game is where the Pirates or the Buccaneers are going to be at. Tanner Thurn, 1,474 yards, 21 touchdowns. He's back. Hunter Bowers, 1,098 yards, 11 touchdowns. He's back. So they return almost over close to 3,000 yards on the ground and over 30 touchdowns on the ground. And then, oh, by the way, they returned Gavin Reck, Cody Fox, who had 12 sacks between the two of them on defense. East Buchanan, sneaky team, but like I said, running game is going to be their main go-to.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine they're one of the few teams that has 1,000+ yard returners. So, yeah, they're definitely an interesting team. I mean, Cody Fox has some ridiculous numbers as a junior with, I believe it's you said it, 9 sacks and 21 TFLs, and then you got 41 TFLs right there coming back. So those guys are going to be lighting up in the backfield, I'm sure.
We'll move on to 8-player, which 8-player this year. Well, actually, let's go back real quick. Look at the rankings for our Class A. Southwest Valley at 4, Columbus at 5. Columbus was pretty fun last year. Linville Sully, they return now in Harder. He's going to be a big part of that offense. They lost a bit on defense. They made it to the state tournament last year. Madrid, South Central Calhoun, Logan Magnolia, and Nashua Plainfield all in our top 10 as well. So Class A, going to be pretty fun, that's for sure.
Now we've got our most open class, we'd say.
Some years we go in and we're like 8-player. Remsen St. Mary's does it. Remsen St. Mary's, I think, graduated their entire football team, honestly, last year. So we will have a new state champion. I can almost guarantee that. There you go, Remsen. There's your bulletin board material. I still love you. I'm going to have Gladbrook Rhinebeck as the top team to beat, and I have them number 1 in our polls. 9-3 record last year. But they returned back Isaac Clark, 1,878 yards passing, 30 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Austin Baverka is kind of unbelievable, 1,155 yards, 20 touchdowns on the ground, 412 yards receiving, and 8 touchdowns. And then Drew Ehlers and Hudson Clark return at wide receiver. They had 8 touchdowns combined. And then Drew also on defense, 13.5 sacks. What kind of wide receiver has 13.5 sacks?
That's an 8-man wide receiver. There we go. I mean, the big thing, I mean, when it comes to 8-man, I'll say is injuries, just playing both ways. You can see guys that are studs just have to sit out or get hurt. So, I mean, we like Gladbrook, but, I mean, as we said, we're about to talk about some more teams, but it's pretty wide open.
It's all even. Yeah, it is all even. Central City, 8-2 record last year. Jaden Hanson is back at quarterback. 13 touchdowns, 3 picks last year, 625 yards. This running game, Paul, again, very good. Aiden and Matthew Klosterman, the Klosterman brothers, 1,803 yards combined, 30 touchdowns combined. Yeah. And then on defense, Makai Benton, 14 sacks, and Braxton Davis, 7 sacks. Central City could be the team to beat. Again, this is so wide open. But they seem pretty full all around.
Yeah. I mean, these teams we're about to talk to, you see an angle for them to win it.
Everywhere.
So, 8-man's, I'd say that's the hardest one to predict just because, I mean, you've got 3 less players out there, more mistakes, and then you've got just some teams that are juggernauts and turning on at the right time. We kind of saw that with Remsen St. Mary's last year. They're always like that. But, I mean, we do have some studs in this class that we can kind of see the single player going off. We will talk about that.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, like it just kind of goes which way. One guy could just go off, and we saw that with Speaker last year, a couple years ago with Cam. Speaking of Cam and speaking of Speaker, his younger brother Chase Speaker, 1,652 yards last year in the passing game, 26 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Austin Williams is back at running back, 851 yards and 16 touchdowns. And then Jack Fullman had 500 yards receiving, 500 yards rushing, and he had 17 total touchdowns. Defense could be an issue for Cam, but I don't know. We saw Cam go out and win the whole thing a couple years ago. They clearly have something figured out with Speaker back at the helm.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, yeah, Cam's right there in the conversation. All 4 of these teams we talk about, as I've repeated, I mean, they're all right there. I mean, Cam's done it. So you can maybe say that.
Well, yeah.
They're not a favorite, but a team that you'd lean on. But I mean, I don't know. There's so many angles you can take with 8-man on who you think is going to win. It just depends on what you like more. The next team we talk about, I mean, they've got Winfield Mount Union with Cam Buffington.
The number one.
Probably we'd say the best player in that class.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to drop some ridiculous stats. It's almost comical looking at his stat sheet.
And defense. I mean, he's
exactly,
both sides of the ball. He is the best player almost in the state.
Yeah, he's got 25 touchdowns, 1,400 plus yards last year, and that was rushing. Added 264 receiving yards in that, and then he's dropping 95.5 tackles last year. We're gonna see 11 tackle games for him. That he also has like 300 plus yards rushing or something crazy like that.
I think it's Cole Milks on the offensive side. Unbelievable. He's technically their quarterback. 723 yards, 11 touchdowns, 421 yards on the ground, 7 touchdowns. And then Abram Edwards, 392 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns on the wide receiver side. He also had 6.5 sacks. Winfield Mount Union, I won't say disappointing last year because they were young, but now this year we're like, okay, here we go. This is going to be the year that
they got
really
their guy.
Cam
Buckington.
So they have everything put together. Just looking at a couple of the other teams we just won't fully talk about, but our possibilities: Southeast Warren, Moravia, Lenox, Harris Lake Park, Fremont Mills, just to name a couple. I've seen a couple of people think of Montezuma could be pretty good. I don't know. It's going to be a fun year. Paul, we did it. We went through all classes, 7 total classes, 5A through 8 player. I think this year, just kind of going candid, just kind of thinking about how things go. One of the more just up in the air kind of years, besides 1A, where I feel like Grundy Center is by far the best team. I feel like
you could argue Southeast Polk with 5A, but 5A, you can always argue as a talent pool that another team can beat another team. So
I just feel like this year is the year of we don't know. It's just kind of a toss-up. There's so many good games. There's a lot on the horizon. I think, you never know. There's freshmen sitting at their house right now that we don't know who they are, and they could come out and shock us. Last year's playoff run in 5A taught us and taught me, I'm like, I'm not writing anybody off in 5A. Like Johnston out of nowhere, Valley out of nowhere. Like you can get hot at the right time and it doesn't matter.
And then you always got to remember the conditions by the end of the year. Change everything. You could have a team that's balling out by throwing it, and then they get to a 30-degree rainy game in the playoffs. That suddenly has to go out the window. So
that's another thing this week, and we'll talk about that in our preview episode in a couple days. But it's 105 this week. Like practices aren't. You can go full speed at practices this week, but at the same time, you can't go out and overwork your guys. Because I think it's going to be almost 90 when we get to Football Friday. So it is going to be very, very hot. It's going to be a hot season. It's going to be great. We appreciate everyone for following along. It's been a blast. Thank you for listening to our preview episode. We will be back in a couple days for your week 1 preview. He is Paul Arridge. I am Blake Walker. We appreciate everyone for watching and listening wherever you're listening. This has been Bound to Talk Football. We'll see you next time.
Official, we got exit music.